What did it mean to join the military in the 1980s? Long before social media, body cams, or hashtags, to deploy to Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, and places most people will never see, while still coming home to serve as a deputy sheriff, SWAT operator, and bomb technician. In this line of work, you cross paths with men like that more often than you think. Quiet professionals, humble, steady, the kind of people who never felt the need to talk about what they did because the work spoke for itself. They didn't chase recognition, they didn't build a brand. They simply showed up, trained hard, protected others, and carried themselves with a level of discipline and excellence that's becoming increasingly rare. Only years later do you look back and realize just how extraordinary those men really were. My guest today is one of those men, Keith Frakes, military veteran, deputy sheriff, SWAT operator, bomb technician, and explosive breaching expert. A quiet professional, a rare breed, a legend. I've heard this a lot from guys and girls. What do I do when I retire? That's another thing we'll talk about hopefully. But how's retirement going for you? You enjoying
It's
it?
yeah, it's going good, Jay. Life throws curveballs at you a little bit, and I had always kind of set 60 as kind of my goal, and I met that, to retire at that point. But my wife has some health issues and stuff, and it's just a little more around the house is necessary and stuff. But all in all, it's going really, really good. I've tinkered with maybe going back and doing a little stuff here and there, but I think um, I think I'm liking how things are going.
Yeah, I mean, you've got decades of service, so well, that's good. Let's get into it then.
Okay.
Everyone, this is Keith Frakes. He retired as a principal member of the technical staff at the United States Department of Energy's Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was assigned to the Explosives Arming and Firing Systems Department. He supported research, testing, and training for the defense, intelligence, and law enforcement communities. Keith was an active member of the Nuclear Emergency Support Team. Prior to joining Sandia Labs in 2004, he served more than 20 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office in Phoenix, Arizona. Keith retired at the rank of captain, having spent most of his career as a bomb technician, tactical officer, and bomb squad SWAT supervisor. He served over a decade on the board of directors for the National Tactical Officers Association and is a member of the IABTI and USBTA. Keith spent over 40 years active in reserve with the U.S. Army, retiring at the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4, with prior assignments at USASOC, Japan, the Pentagon, and deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. His last assignment was with the Army Reserve Element, U.S. SOCOM Intelligence Directorate. He resides in New Mexico with his wife of 34 years. They have 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren, correct?
That's right.
All right. Well, Keith, welcome to the show, brother. It's so good to see you and talk to you. It's been a little while.
Yeah, Jay, same. I like what you're doing with this thing. I think it's fantastic. I appreciate you having me on. And you and I go back a ways, and maybe we'll
We
touch on that some as we talk. But
do.
thanks for having me.
Yeah. No, you were always respected in our line of work. I remember I worked with Mike Conto. He kind of got me into this world, and he always talked about you and how he respected you, and you're well known and trusted in our community. And frankly, throughout the United States, people have known you. I definitely wanted to talk with you and share your story of service and all the things that you've done over the years. And hopefully, those who are listening to this, if they're thinking about, joining the military or becoming a law enforcement officer, you'd be definitely the one to hear from. So thank you for jumping on today.
Of course.
And you're retired. So what other things do you have to do other than spend some time with me, right?
Yeah, well, grandkids number one for sure, and then we did buy some property in New Mexico, kind of out in a remote, beautiful area where we can shoot and camp and just be safe and get away from stuff. And I rode a Harley for a long time and traded that, I don't know, a year or so ago for a three-wheel Can-Am Spyder. So
Well,
my
that sounds great.
my wife will ride on that. She wouldn't get on the Harley, but so we do a little bit of that, and then tinker around the yard, and I don't know, just enjoying life. And I saw a thing the other day that said it was talking about fitness and what have you, and said the number one reason to stay fit in retirement is so that you can run around with your grandkids.
Yeah, that
I
makes
think
sense.
I think that's a little motivator for me. I put on a few pounds since I retired, but feeling good, doing good, and thought about maybe going back and doing a little something here or there. But quite honestly, I'm happy where we're at right now.
Yeah. Have you thought about writing a book or anything on your time? All I mean, you have decades of service. You must have seen many things and experienced many things.
Well, not so much a book. I may look at some articles for the Tactical Edge for N2A, that kind of thing. And that would be one thing I would recommend for anybody out there is, as you come through your career is, write some articles, present papers at conferences. Those things are good as you develop up through your career and what have you. But ironically, both of my kids separately and unknowing to each other, had given me a book that says, Dad, we want to hear your story.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen those, but they're pretty cool. And you go through it, and it starts as you're growing up and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to do one of them because it'll be repetitive. But I think that'll, from standpoint of writing a book, I think filling in that whole dang thing will probably be a near term goal.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, in our line of work, I'm just happy that I'm still married to the same woman, and I'm still
Likewise.
happy my kids, they want to see me and call me. And that's not always the case. I'm very fortunate that that's a part of my riches, I guess. I'm just so blessed with family. And it sounds like you are as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's just get into it. Let's talk just a little bit about how you grew up, where that happened, what that looked like for you.
Sure. So actually, I was born at the Marine Corps base at Quantico. My dad was a Marine Corps officer at the time, infantry officer, and so he went to Vietnam shortly after that, and ended up doing 8 years in the Marine Corps and got out. And we moved around a little bit. Kind of ended up in Phoenix. I went to school in Phoenix, high school, most of elementary school there. My parents did split, and my mom remarried to a wonderful man and stuff. Phoenix is home. We still have a lot of family there and stuff like that. But I graduated high school there in 1980 and didn't want to go straight to college.
Yeah.
Reagan, the time Reagan was running for office, and it looked like he was going to win. And I had started following politics and current events and things. The hostages were still in the embassy in Tehran. Um, just decided to join the army, almost kind of on a
Really?
spur. Yeah, yeah. And so I did that. I went in on active duty as a military policeman and went to basic and AIT at Fort McClellan, believe it or not, at the time. And
Yeah.
ended up going to Germany as an MP. So 18, 19 years old,
Wow,
single
in the 80s in
in the
Germany.
in the 80s. Yeah.
What
So,
was that like?
well, it would be another 8 or 9 years until the wall would come down.
Yeah. Yeah.
The U.S. still had tactical nuclear weapons there in the hands of the army. But you could kind of see those winds change coming and stuff like that. So that was kind of just an interesting time to serve. And, it was just as a young man, I think, or a young woman, a couple of years in the service is good, probably good for everybody. And, it went by super fast. I get out and then I'm like, okay, what do I want to do now? Sheriff's office was hiring and I drove a limousine for a couple of months, believe it or not. And
Just as a side gig?
well, before I got hired, I'm waiting for
Yeah.
the hiring process, and it was pretty cool because you're doing all these fancy stuff around Scottsdale and Paradise Valley and
Yeah.
all these fancy areas around Phoenix and all that. Then the next week, it's like picking up super rich, snotty kids from their houses and taking them to what do you call it, private schools and whatever. And then that was followed by funerals, and I'm like, all right, I get it, but limo driving ain't for me, and
What
it
wasn't
wasn't
for you?
meant to be anything anyway. But the point is, I get hired by the sheriff's office and went through the academy there. And at the time, the sheriff's office did not have their own academy; it was the Phoenix Regional Academy.
Yeah. Well, let me back us up just a little bit. I got some questions about Germany because I was just there. Went
Wow.
to the Brandenburg Gate, went to Checkpoint
Okay.
Charlie, all those. Were
Nice,
you
nice.
around any of those spots?
So, we were still divided then and all that kind of stuff. And I was south of Frankfurt near Darmstadt and area named Babenhausen. But I did take the train at the time over to Berlin. You could do that through the occupied areas and stuff. But the Soviets at the time still had a lot of people lurking around, and it was just an interesting time to be there. I have not been back since, but that's a bucket list item. And I was going to talk about bucket list stuff later.
Yeah. Yeah, I found it to be fascinating. I was around some really good guys that they run the bomb school out there in Germany, and, hopefully they're listening, but they were very, accommodating and willing to talk about all different types of history with Germany, and I know that that's something that, is ingrained in a lot of them about the past, and they were just great guys, had a very strong passion for bomb work and
Uh-huh.
protecting the community. And so I got an opportunity to go around with them and visit these amazing sites of history. So that's interesting that you were there. How long were you actually there for?
I was there about 20 months, maybe something like
Okay.
that, just under 2 years or something. But what was interesting at that time is I would say the majority of our senior NCOs were Vietnam veterans still.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? From the,
Yeah.
the early 70s and,
Sure.
lifers and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And same as in boot camp and AIT, they were all right patch Vietnam veterans and stuff. And it didn't really kind of dawn on me, at the time or anything. I mean, I knew they were, but I mean, as far as the importance of that and what it would come to mean to me later.
Yeah. Yeah. Were they pretty hardcore still coming out
Yeah,
of the war theaters?
yeah, and a couple of them with PTSD, pretty bad. I mean,
Mm.
you wake these guys up out of a sleep, and they're just like, and so it was just kind of an interesting thing. A side note there that they were, yeah, they're certainly lifers, and kind of on the tail end of that was kind of an interesting thing to have as part of my early career.
Yeah. And so you had already left before, the gate came down, the walls came down. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was,
because that 89, something
yeah.
like that. But you could feel it kind of coming, and
Interesting.
you could see it. And there was a big no nukes effort there to remove nuclear warheads there, and just the tactical stuff and everything. So there was some civil stuff going on, and civil disorder, which may be something we can talk about later here from a
Yeah.
domestic
Yeah.
standpoint. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it was just an interesting time, and I'd like to go back. I did go back to Panama a couple of months ago and ran around some of the areas. I had done some army time down in that area, so that
Yeah,
was
I
kind
would
of cool
definitely
too.
talk about that too.
Sure,
I didn't know you had been down there. That's interesting. Well, I hope you get back. It was a great experience for me, and I would definitely go back. The food was great, and we went during the Christmas time, so
sure,
all the Christmas markets were out,
yeah,
and it was cold, but it was great history lesson for sure for me.
yeah.
All right, so you move to Phoenix. You get done with high school. You decide you didn't want to go to college at the time.
Yeah, I just was ready to do it, and I think, like I said, there were some political things going on, things like that, and the army at the time was running some pretty good commercials, be all you
Sure,
can be and
be all you can
whatever.
be. Yeah.
So I went for it, and like I said, I got out. It was good, and it was just a short period of time before I got picked up at the sheriff's office and kind of started my law enforcement time. But I did stay in the reserves, and we kind of talk about that, Jay,
Okay.
because if we go through timeline of we're old, brother. Everybody's retiring and whatever, but when you look at my timeline, one, it goes super fast, but two, my military stuff ran parallel with my law enforcement and my later work at Sandia, and they were very synergistic and complementary. So I think from a timeline, we can probably bounce a little from one to the other,
Yeah.
maybe.
Well, I would definitely recommend if people who are listening to this are in the military and want to get out, I think it's a good idea to stay in the reserves because there's so much you can do on that side as well. I still say, associated with, military people and military lifestyle, and some people like the regimented life. You could get that in law enforcement, but I think that's a good thing. I definitely want to cover that as well. So you get out. What kind of pushed you to want to go into law enforcement? Did it just make sense for you because you were already a police
I
You know,
think
in the
the MP background, yeah,
okay.
it was that, and I kind of developed an interest for the tactical side of things. It would be a little bit of time until things like Columbine came around or what have you. But, our unit there was a full-time unit. And I went out to patrol initially into the Mesa area, East Mesa, Chandler, East Valley of the Phoenix metropolitan area. As you know, Jay, Maricopa County is very large and encompasses that whole metropolitan area, from sand dunes all the way to 10,000 feet with snow. So a lot of lakes and rivers and whatever. And they had a diving program that was interesting to me and stuff, or interesting, of interest to me. And so, went out to patrol, did that, loved that, really enjoyed doing street work. And back then, you could be a police officer,
Yeah, right.
and a deputy sheriff. It was a good time to be a police officer because
It was.
you could lock up people that needed it and you could help people that needed it. And it was just that kind of a thing. So I did that for a couple years. An opening came up in SWAT. By that time, though, I had joined the reserves. We can kind of talk about what was going on with that. So I joined the reserves quite quickly after coming off active duty. And it was an airborne unit, an intelligence unit in support of SOF, and a lot of cops in the unit. And some guys from the Tucson area were in the unit even. And um, they were on jump status and stuff, so I kind of got that iron in the fire too,
Yeah.
and tried out for SWAT and made the unit, and it was just a good time to come on board over there.
What year did you get in? What year did you get on the SWAT?
So that I joined the sheriff's office in '83
83. Okay.
and came on to SWAT in '86.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And do they have their own SWAT school there, or was that
Yeah, we ran internally, and then we would run people through other SWAT schools for sure. There was a state association at the time, and then we sent a lot of. I didn't get the chance to go, but we did send a lot of people over to the LA Sheriff's SEB SWAT school, and what have you. But we ran one internally, and then we would run one for other agencies as well periodically. And it was a full-time gig, take-home cars, things like that. But another I think interesting piece of maybe our conversation, Jay, is just what things looked like at that time. No ballistic helmets.
really for SWAT?
Yeah, yeah. No, we were wearing ball caps or balaclavas or something like that. I mean, we had riot helmets and things like that, but and I'm talking almost across the country, with maybe a few exceptions. Sub guns were just coming in new, kind of the MP5 phase before, people went to short barrel rifles. You wouldn't see a suppressor. You wouldn't see, these advanced communication systems and things like that. Light mounts for your handguns and say sub guns were fabricated by individuals, and some of which went later on to say companies like Streamlight and really got that stuff going. But we had what we needed, but I just look at the way things came, and they came quickly after I came on. We saw a trajectory of things where, things like explosive breaching and, modern distraction and
Yeah.
diversionary devices were just kind of coming online and things like that. And so we kind of saw a phase change from less lethal stuff coming in. And I'm talking about things that weren't just traditional burning tear gas and riot control type stuff, but things for more tactical situations and things like that. So, really ramped up a lot of things in the munition area of capabilities. And then, we had great relationships with the LA area teams and the others in the valley for sure, and just started to kind of take that next step towards modernizing the capability, and along with that came the equipment and TTPs.
Yeah. So did you get a lot of this equipment from the military, or were you guys, you know, I know the SWAT started around in the 70s, early 70s, I believe. I know the Bureau of SWAT started in 73, but did really a lot of this come from war theater training and experience?
Yeah, I think so. Like our units, old timers were Vietnam vet guys and stuff like that. So, that's kind of what their knowledge base and tactics base came from and stuff like that. But, you had the LA Olympics and a lot of things that were starting to come up, and we're still digesting lessons from the late '60s through the middle '70s with the Weather Underground, the regional Black Panthers, SDS, and stuff like that. So I think, TTPs were being developed like that. And then, it wasn't long after I kind of came on board that Arizona had a huge issue with methamphetamine laboratories, rock houses, and fortified locations and stuff. So things like bar pulls and explosive entry and stuff like that were really kind of coming together to, bring us to kind of a new level. Air insertion and, just those kinds of things were starting to spin up. I spent 10 years on the unit as an operator full time and went to bomb school during part of that 10-year period there where I got my certification of that. And our unit always had bomb techs as operators. And it's kind of interesting, the Canadian, a lot of Canadians, and there's other units that, were doing TBT before TBT became a
Yeah,
thing,
existed. Yeah.
quite honestly. And our leadership saw the value of, close tactical support or close bomb tech support within the tactical ranks. So a lot of us, even though we were full-time SWAT, we were kind of part-time of both to make up our full-time, if you will. And then we had other techs that were canine handlers or what have you, but pretty much all from within that same division. So we didn't have some of the same issues I think you see sometimes between SWAT and bombs and all that. I mean, that stuff was worked out a long time ago with our.
Yeah, it seemed like that was a thing for a while, and I think there is still some of that. It's
Mhm.
changing because I think, teams are realizing that there are real explosive threats. And so when I was on Tucson PD, I was on SWAT and the bomb squad, and there was separation there for sure. And we weren't doing really any TBT stuff, tactical bomb tech stuff. One, because I didn't know any, I was fairly new to both worlds. So I was just trying to be an operator and a bomb tech separately. And so that's interesting that you guys, were thinking of those things and kind of doing some of that stuff already. How was the training during that time when you first got on? What did that look like for you guys?
Well, I mean, our initial SWAT school was a week or 2, and it was pretty tough. I mean, it was physical and all that kind of stuff, and the shooting and all that kind of stuff, but we spent a lot of time on movement techniques and really, I guess, what people would call today threat assessment or what have you, but really thinking through different problems. And we via the NTOA, and we were pretty active with that, as a team, we studied a lot of other incidents, which is healthy, and how would we have, approached something similar and things like that. And I think we, like many teams, fell into a period of time where dynamic type entry was the way of doing business. And
Yeah.
in some cases, that makes perfect sense, particularly for hostage recovery or what have you. But from a drug standpoint or arrests and stuff like that, it would be some period of time until things like contain and call out and, clever or creative ruses and things like that to take people off target, away from, a stronghold. But I think one good thing is we were able to adapt over time and kind of, reassess the way we did business and stuff like that. But, the equipment came, some of it through surplus, as you said, and stuff like that, and then later, certainly post 9/11 and Y2K and what have you,
Yeah. Yeah.
grants and stuff like that. But
Sure.
we were early adopters of armor, mobile armor, and I mentioned the explosive breaching. That ended up being a big piece of my plate. At the department there and with NTOA, I did some things with them, and then I've been involved in the Breacher Symposium for many years and what have you. So that was kind of a subset of interest of mine.
So was explosive, and if you can tell the audience, they may not know what is an explosive breacher. What does that look like? Is that a bomb tech? Is it not?
Yeah, well, there's the $1,000,000 question. For us, it was a SWAT trained operator who was specifically trained to do breaching. For us, most of them were bomb techs as well, and only because we just had kind of an internal thing there. That was all. But I have seen some very good organizations that have non-bomb technicians doing explosive breaching, and they're fabulous. And I've seen some bomb technicians doing explosive breaching that may not necessarily be their cup of tea as well too. So I think it was more about how, having the capability and having a good solid use criteria and having the stuff available for immediate use, which is particularly very important, especially in this day and age, to be able to have not just render safe tools and things of that nature. I mean, we keep our magazines loaded for our rifles and I mean stuff. So, agencies that are poised for immediate response with explosive breaching really take their capability to kind of that next level of stuff. And our agency was super supportive of sending us to other places to, train, see how people were doing that. And we had a chance to train, others over the years and had quite a few operational uses of the capability. And, I think right now you have across the United States, we've got hundreds and hundreds of operational uses now. And I don't think there's too many targets out there that we don't have good solutions for. I think right now it's a matter of winning over hearts and minds. I think a lot of administrations have come around just by the virtue of how many teams have a capability. But I really do think that the use criteria, when it's appropriate, when it's not, organizations that may be too reluctant to use it when it's appropriate. So
Is it?
you got overuse and underuse, if you will, potential.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could see how there could be issues depending on, the experience level and what the agency's heads would be concerned with. Is that, was that always something that got in the way of you moving your skill set forward? Was it something that was accepted with your agency, that it was professionalized and standardized? Or was it kind of just this new thing and they're trying to figure it out, and over time it evolves into what it is now? Or
Yeah,
was it
I
sketch?
I think it was more like that, Jay, is, we saw the value in it. You saw some worldwide events where, it was brought to bear for a good resolution. And, I had some leaders at the time with pretty gung ho guys, and they weren't in it for any kind of ego trip or flexing or anything like that. They just saw it really as a life saving capability. Over the years, fortunately, the charges have gotten a little smarter, a little smaller, and we're learning a lot more about how much it really takes to do the job and all that. But I think the packaging and the deployment capabilities, everything from adhesives to, just the whole shoot and match and stuff has really put a number of agencies on the map that in my estimation are really doing it right. And then there's others that are super capable and everything like that, but they've got a loggerhead at the command level.
Is there a lot of math and science involved in doing explosive breaching?
Yeah, there is, and it's an elusive thing. And a lot of people, including the NTOA, we've taken some stabs at that, and not always had home runs with that. And private sector has done a lot of that. And then now, I think with AI and some of the stuff coming on board, I think we're going to see some of these things. And the whole idea is to predict a safe distance for your team members and to predict potential hazards on the friendly side. The explosive choice, either in configuration or what kind of tamping you might be using, as shape, etc. For the targets, I think we, as a community, pretty much have that piece there. It's a little bit more about how close is too close, and how far away is unnecessary and stuff. But there's some really good protocols, I think, coming out there as far as extending your distances during training and rotating your people through positions, to where they get exposures, spread the load a little bit and things like that. But, a lot of it is related to the research that they're doing in TBI and stuff from, repetitive blast injuries. And many of those are super, super, large events with a very long exposure period, whereas breaching, for the most part, with the exception of, say, doing heavy walls, something like that, those charges you could be fairly close to, and you can have repetitive exposures to those with proper PPE and planning. Wall breaching, on roofs and those kinds of things, you're looking at some stuff that's pretty tough. But you know, I think the private sector and the training providers that are out there right now are doing a very good job of addressing the training need for public safety people right now. I know there have been talk over the years of whether Huntsville should take on something like that, or ATF, or Marshals, or somebody, DHS, when they were stood up, maybe that could be a piece or something for them. But by and large, I think the private sector is doing a good job of turning out those kinds of breachers. And they have, the breacher circle in Nevada and the symposium, and there's other, exchanges and stuff. But the Europeans, they're all over this. A lot of them go to the breacher symposium, and they have an organization in Europe called Atlas, and it's a quasi-governmental thing that is kind of their NTOA in a way, I guess, for Europe. And man, their breachers are on it. So I think, you you always think, US has got it, but there's some other countries out there that are all over that stuff. The Germans are one. You mentioned Germany.
Yeah, I ran across. They took me to one of their SWAT teams, and those guys they were pretty squared away. I was impressed, and they do breaching. They weren't bomb techs. It seemed there's some differences there, but they had a breaching group, and so they were very capable for sure.
Yeah.
As far as I interviewed Dr. Sarah Charbonneau, who was a bomb technician for in Florida, and she got her doctorate in physical science with specialty in TBI and that kind of thing. Has that been a? It seems like there's more awareness of it for sure, but has that been something that your breaching community has been having concerns with or thought about, or at least built charges or done things in that regard to protect officers from experiencing that?
Yeah, certainly from an awareness standpoint, there is. But like you said, I really think that the biggest hazard, and I think the numbers bear it out, at least from a public safety breaching standpoint, is that fragmentation is the primary hazard, to the operators and occupants, quite frankly. And that's difficult to predict. But I think through, a lot of training, things like that, you can really get a feel for what pieces are doing, say your charge is doing, and where you can expect those kinds of things to go to. And then inside, if you're not overcharging the shot, then the chance of sending, a doorknob through someone's head is reduced. Um, yeah, I think as much attention has been paid to blast injury from a public safety breacher's perspective, that really is a horse of another color to compared to say TBI that people overseas receive from, V
Sure.
beds and just
Right.
some of that kind of stuff. So you do reach a point where it's a little bit apples and oranges, but I mean, specifically to things that would worry me more is fragmentation.
Fragmentation.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
you can overcome that by tamping. And, if you're tamping things, you can typically use less explosives, right? And then charge placement, explosive types, and just being wise about that. There's some good commercial products out there for sure, the Cherry Engineering line and the Alford Technologies lines, and there's others that have some really good stuff in there that give you repeatability and reproducibility and uniformity and predictability and stuff. And speaking of the European teams and stuff like that, that's one thing I really thought they did a great job of is standardizing their explosive charges and uniformity of kind of the way they do business and stuff like that. And we don't have that in the US. We don't really have a national breaching standard, national breaching program like HDS that sets a curriculum and mints out a new bomb tech and things like that. I think the program down at TEACS is probably the closest that we have to maybe a governmental funded kind of program for breaching training and stuff like that. Right now, the private sector and some of the more the professional associations and stuff like that kind of have that charter, if you will, unofficially.
Yeah. That's surprising. I mean, I guess I can see there's not all one SWAT school either. There's
Right.
many
Exactly.
types of SWAT school. That's why we are definitely fortunate at HDS to have one
Mhm.
school for
Mhm.
standardization.
Yeah.
The charges mainly, I mean, it seems like in that community, people know each other and there are some standards, right? I mean, there are some breaching charges that are standardized or
I mean,
no?
it's maybe not standardized right down to the nth, but I think you've got probably a handful of styles or types of charges that really cover most bases. And I'm talking water impulse type charges, line charges, things that have some tamping and blast attenuation and features like that, like this fire hose charge. And I mean, there's just some stuff like that. And rubber strip charges and other kinds of, inert materials to act as either buffers or tampers. So I think there is a family kind of charges that are out there, but a lot of it is still improvised. And that's okay. It's an improvised kind of setting. But I think the more the community moves towards standardization in, using fabricated systems or, that kind of stuff. But the big determiner for me really is still the use case logic. When does it make sense to do it and that kind of stuff because I've seen that that's one of the big hurdles for sure, and then the other one is who's going to do it. Is it going to be a bomb tech or a SWAT guy, and does it have to be one or the other? My experience has been that there's successes in both of those for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
either way.
So when we're talking about explosive breaching, just for the audience, we're using explosives to push water and other materials into hinges or doors to open them, right? That's the main purpose.
Yeah, that's essentially it, is to overcome barriers, and there can be some tactical advantages of using it even on barriers that aren't reinforced. So perhaps explosives may not be necessary to defeat that target. Perhaps it is a target that can be defeated with other manual ballistic means or what have you, but an explosive breach may bring an element of dynamics to, say, particularly a hostage rescue. And there's times when you don't want to enter the structure at that moment. Maybe not a hostage rescue, maybe a barricaded subject or something where a limited penetration or a breach and delay is a viable option. We had a handful of incidents where the guy's not coming out, doesn't want to talk, refuses. Maybe chemical agents have been unsuccessful. So you kind of work through the progression or what have you on one of those guys. Sometimes you can pop a door and just hold what you got. And we had guys that were three-time losers said, "All right, I'm done." So it just kind of depends. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's to breach barriers. And in the earliest days, and I mentioned kind of the crack houses and stuff that LA was seeing, is that was really the only way to get into some of these places. I mean, traditional pry bars and things like that were not feasible or what have you, or maybe you couldn't get lined up to do a bar pull or something along those lines. So there can be times, and certainly in the early days, where it was kind of the only solution to physically get something. We weren't doing much with torches and saws at the time, certainly early on, but it really grew out of hostage rescue, and for some teams, I think they reluctantly, in a way, or unfortunately, in a way, only have it in that bin. They don't maybe use it on other times. And I think as the community has gone away from dynamic entry on, say, search warrant, drug type search warrants and stuff like that, then you see less of explosive breaching in that kind of scenarios. But it's been successful on resolving barricaded type individuals, and then is certainly a key component of any deliberate hostage recovery.
Do you have a favorite breach you can talk about on a
Well, we
call?
did. Yeah, I mean, we did one on, it was a hostage thing, guy with a knife, and we ended up, we were going to dump this guy who presented himself. So the talk was such that this guy was gonna kill this child, and we ultimately did an explosive breach too, actually on two doors at one time, and kind of got the drop on this guy, which it helps buy you some time in many cases, few seconds. And then I had some others where we were able to defeat some barriers that were substantial. Most of them were warrant related when we were still doing that kind of a thing. And in hindsight, not convinced it was probably the best way to go, not from the threat of the explosive entry, just all things considered. But I'm still a big believer in it, big time. I mean, it was a fun piece of additional work, if you will, while I was on the unit, and my administration gave me quite a bit of latitude to go see what other people were up to, and make sure our stuff was good to go.
Now, were you a bomb tech yet? Were you a certified bomb tech at the time, or did that come later?
I was starting to do a little bit of the breaching stuff just before I went to become a bomb tech, and then I went to HDS in '90, so I'd been on the team about 4 years. So yeah, I was already kind of doing some of that, and we had a capability, and it was pretty rudimentary. I mean, in the early days, I was looking at some old photos not too long ago, Jay, and I mentioned we didn't have ballistic helmets, early on and
Yeah,
stuff. And so this photo was taken with some of the old timers from DPS and what have you, and the guys are lined up there. Here's a fireball from det cord charge, I'm sure, of some sort,
right.
and they're all wearing motorcycle helmets with
My
visors.
gosh.
Yeah, all different
Wow.
colors and shit. It's really kind of crazy.
What got you interested in doing that? Was it just another cool thing to do, and just you had an opportunity, or like what did you? How did that kind of help or make you decide to get on the bomb squad at that point?
I mean, it's just super interesting. And, I had tested and it looked like I was going to be going to HCS, got my packet in and stuff like that. And it just kind of went hand in hand with it and all that. And when I came back from HDS, kind of fell on me as a little bit of we had some turnover and what have you. So, kind of fell on me as to be just kind of one of those things. And,
The
um,
opportunities
yeah,
presented themselves.
fortunately, like I said, I had a great command staff and a lot of construction in the Phoenix metropolitan area. So we had access to lots and lots of structures to practice on, and it just ended up being like I said, just kind of a fun part of my career for sure.
You got on SWAT, you became a bomb technician, explosive breacher. At what point were you involved with the military reserve part?
So I went in the reserves right about the time I got out. So about the time
Okay.
I was coming on the sheriff's office, I got into this reserve outfit, and it was an intelligence outfit, and so I was an enlisted guy, and went to the counterintelligence training, and then jump school, and later jump master school and all that. And it was a very active unit. I mean, and you have a reserve background too. Some units are really active, some not so much. And we were jumping all the time, Alaska,
Really?
Hawaii, all around the U.S., down Huachuca, everywhere. I was getting a lot of jumps in and doing a lot of fun stuff like that. And so we're talking late '80s, that kind of stuff. There was a time where I was looking at some of your notes earlier, and you're saying, about setbacks or whatever. There was a time when I was looking at, and I'd been on SWAT bombs 6, 7 years probably at that time in the reserves, in this unit. Our agency was getting their first helicopters. And I said, shit, I'm going to go to warrant officer flight school, fly in the guard, right? And then maybe get on the aviation unit as a pilot. Oh, really excited. Took what's called the FAST test and aptitude test for pilots and whatever. Did really good on that, and then failed the vision test. Yeah, and so at the time, the Army was not taking waivers for vision correction, and they do that on cycles based on their needs. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't, and in this case, they would not, and that was crushing. That hurt a little bit, it stung, but have a plan B, right, everybody? And so my plan B was to become a warrant officer in the counterintelligence field, and I ultimately did that. I ended up with 16 years as enlisted time, and then 25 as a warrant, and that was the best thing I ever did, because my warrant officer assignments throughout the community really, really were very satisfying.
Yeah. So what did that look like? Like, how did all that, when you went from enlisted to warrant, what did that allow you to do? Or was that a leadership position in a different way? Or did it allow you to do more operational type of events? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so the unit I was in had a lot of warrant officers, and so I was able to stay in the counterintelligence field. But as an Army warrant officer, they're technically considered, subject matter experts in a particular field and things like that. And so, in the last number of years, they began to take on more leadership positions as detachment OICs and things like that. But for the most part, warrant officers, and particularly as I became a more senior warrant officer, man, that's the place to be. So we got people out there to think about joining the Army. Look at the warrant officer program, and I would say that for the other services that have warrant officers too. And then real quickly, Jay, on a point you made earlier is if you maybe served initially and then didn't finish your time out or something like that, look at the Guard or the Reserve about going back in and finishing up your time and stuff like that, because it'll draw a pension at some point later and cover your medical and things like that. Plus, I think right now is probably a interesting time to maybe go
Yes.
back into service.
Yes. Yeah. My son just did that. There's a lot of benefits for going back in after you get out of active duty.
Yeah, sure.
And so it seems like you have a lot of stuff going on during that time. You were in law enforcement and you were doing military service. How did you balance all that? How did you do all that?
Yeah, well, work-life balance is something I jotted down as well, Jay, and I haven't done the best at that over the years, to be honest with you. I really did put my job first. A lot of times, next thing you know, your kids are grown, and so around this same period of time we're talking about here, I got married. My wife was she was a civilian at the sheriff's office, and then went on to become a 911 dispatch supervisor at Tempe PD. We got married, had our first child, and then the second child in late '80s around that time and stuff. So yeah, I think my work-life balance, even though work was really busy, I think things were a little bit different. And then, along comes 9/11, and that really changed a lot of things for me. Jumping back real quick, Jay, I kind of mentioned about how kind of some of the SWAT equipment was on a trajectory, and there was just a lot of new stuff going on and things like that. When I came out of basic, HDS, the campus, I don't even know if it was a dream at that point, the HDS
Yeah.
complex.
It was
We were
still in the
still,
Quonset huts, right?
yeah, yeah, we were
Yeah.
still in the old stuff. And
Yeah.
wet film, the original FBI
Yeah.
cannon, the original FBI water cannon.
Yep.
We didn't have robots yet at that point in my unit. Others did, earlier on and stuff. I got to see that whole thing kind of change too as we
Yeah.
moved to all the stuff that's out there today. Jay, you and I have worked together on some things that, uh, man, If they would have had some of the programs that are out there now when I was back then, I'd still be back there in a
Yeah.
wheelchair. It'd be wheeling me around to sustainment trainings or what have you
Yeah.
and stuff. But I just thought I'd mention that from my timeline, I got to see a lot of dinosaur stuff go away and a lot of cool shit come in, then it fall off, and then where we are today, when you look at modern tactical operators and bomb squads,
Yeah.
it's
It's
really,
amazing.
really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I know the equipment on both ends. I experienced that too. When I went through, it was, I graduated July 27th, 2001. So right before 9/11, and it was still wet film. We had an old robot. We had the pan and some other things, but it wasn't like it is now where you have a lot of choices in how you deal with things. Digital wasn't even a thing. We didn't even have cell phones. If you look back, I tried when I was the chief over at HDS. I had some of those old things. I had a developer and the
Mhm.
cassette, and I put those in a cabinet because I wanted students to remember where they came from. That
Sure. Yeah.
that men and women before them had nothing, and they had to use their minds. They had to use common sense approach to dealing with these things, whether it was rigging or how you X-ray, those kind of things. You were coming up with solutions to
Mhm.
problems and being successful. You can have all this fancy gear, you can have digital, but if it goes down, you got to figure something out.
Sure, yeah, and, one of the benefits I think I saw in the Phoenix area is, everybody got along, brother. I mean, all the teams, and, that's Arizona-wide, right? Because I, had a lot of help from your predecessors like Butch and
Yes.
Brandy and stuff, so those types of folks, were really helpful to me, Hacksaw and some of the others at State Police and what have you, so there's just a lot of people that I benefited from. None of the squads were super big either, right? And so we ran a lot of calls together. If we were running on something, we'd have them come. The SABTs at that point in time were not particularly active with the public safety guys in our area, not a knock or anything, but look where they're at today.
Yeah.
Man,
Oh, yeah.
those bubbas are out there in the thick of it, leading stuff, and just I really think that's been a great thing for the community, overall too, is to see that that kind of progress or development too and stuff. But you know, um, being a mentor and mentoring others, that's been a thing of mine, and I've benefited from just so many great people that have been helpful to me. So, as I started to get towards a point where, as a full-time team member there, around 10 years is probably going to be about where you're going to start thinking about promoting. But I was, doing the Army Reserve stuff. I'd went to warrant officer school and was still kind of doing warrant stuff on the weekends. And then it just came time to promote.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of being a mentor and being mentored?
Yeah. Well, one, you have, embrace a philosophy of being a lifelong learner. And by doing that, you have to reach out to people who you admire and people that you want to emulate, right? And so seeking out good mentors is, absolutely important. Military does a pretty good job of that. I don't know, law enforcement does as well of a job on that, but it's kind of a military thing for sure. So that was super important for me, just is to find people that I trusted and could tell you when, you know, you're looking at a bridge too far or it's something that's, within grasp. And then so being a mentor, I mean, it's the same thing as offering up that same kind of frank discussions with people to help guide them along. And, you know, I don't know, it's just one of those things that's super important. It goes hand in hand with networking. If you're a good networker and you have, kind of an enterprise of people and things like that, then mentoring is almost kind of a symbiotic thing in that relationship. And man, that's so important. And you know that, Jay, how important networking is
Yeah,
because
definitely.
you can pick up the phone and ask people for
Yeah.
help anytime.
Game changer.
That's one of the great things about HDS, because even coming out of the initial certification, you immediately have a network,
Yeah.
right, to start on, and then every time you go back, you expand on that. Another way from a mentoring standpoint, is to teach. If that's of interest for you, I think there you get a lot of good feedback from that kind of stuff, and everybody has something to give in that regard. And so, writing articles or delivering a presentation at a conference or something like that is I think important. And, staying involved in some of our professional organizations. I was pretty active in IEBTI for a number of years, not in their boards or that kind of stuff, but just as a chapter or regular member and stuff. Less so with USBTA, just because I'm no longer kind of in that. But I follow what they're doing, and I see a lot of really good training stuff going on out there, Jay, by those two organizations and others. You got Ravens Challenge and just a lot of really good stuff going on out there, opportunities for guys to network and meet some of those people that could be mentors.
Yeah. No, I agree. I had some amazing mentors, mainly in police. I had one or two military, but I was more around law enforcement all the time. So I had those that wanted to see me win. They wanted to see me be successful, and they would call me out when I was doing something stupid. And I'll never forget any of that. Let's go back to Panama. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so I guess the Noriega thing went down in what, 88, 89.
Something like that, yep.
Yeah. So the reserve unit I was in, like I mentioned, had a lot of police officers. So right when that went down, Fort Bragg called and said, "Hey, we're looking for some soft type guys that have police skills to come down and help establish the new Panamanian National Police," which was being drawn from the Panamanian forces. And this is well before ISITAP or some of the other State Department programs and stuff would ultimately land and take that role. But I said, "Heck yeah, how long?" And they said, "Well, 6, 8 weeks." I said, "I'm in." So we get down there, and I get partnered up with a major from the Puerto Rican National Guard, super guy, cop. And we were attached to the 7th Group, 3rd Battalion, I believe, that was operating way in the northwestern area of Panama, a very beautiful area up in the mountains, lush, coffee growing regions, that kind of stuff, not in the jungles of the rest of Panama, but it's just gorgeous. And so, we were helping take troops and get them into basic policing and really just trying to keep, some order in the cities, a large city out that area called David. And it was just a great experience. And I mean, we were there quite quick after, no, I think Noriega had surrendered out of the Vatican by then, but it was very early on. And so, but this particular area that we were operating in, collecting guns that had been stashed and, all kinds of stuff like that, and was an area called Boquete. And it was the prettiest place I'd ever seen on earth, Jay. And I said, "Man, I'm coming back here someday." And so it was a bucket list. So we went down there, my wife and I, just a couple months ago, and spent a week in the same area.
Really?
It was as beautiful as I remembered, and we stayed at a lovely resort with golf courses like I've never seen, manicured golf courses like this and stuff. And it was just really kind of one of those things. It was a bucket list thing, but again, probably the most beautiful area I've ever been to. And I've had a chance to be around a little bit. And, a lot of American expats down there, a lot of Canadians. So in that particular area of Panama, the US dollar is still their official currency.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and most of them speak English, and I do speak some Spanish and stuff, so it was easy enough to do that and everything. But it was just one of those things I'd always said I wanted to do, and we did it. Not much more to it.
Yeah.
My part in the whole Panama thing, other than I got to see a lot of the operational areas, where things had happened. But as far as the work and the assignment down there was pretty straightforward and all that, but it was just one of those things where I said I want to go back and see this place again.
Yeah, another good experience.
Yeah.
Did when Iraq and Afghanistan happened, did you deploy to any of those theaters?
Yeah, I did. So let's see. 9/11 happens. Let me see. That's 2001. Oh, you know what? So I'm a sergeant. I go out to the field, go to Lake Patrol for a little while in a unit called Squad 5, and then did a short stint about a year at a gang and drug task force, and then came back to the unit. Maybe lieutenant came back to the unit. So 9/11 happens. I'm back in the division, SWAT division, as a lieutenant. Still getting to be an active bomb tech as a lieutenant, which
that's great.
Kind of rare, but not impossible out there. And so 9/11 happens. Obviously, things within the department and everybody is looking at different things.
That changed everything.
And so I'm now in the Army program where I'm assigned to USTOC at Fort Bragg, and they call me, and the guy says, this is like 2 days after 9/11, your country needs you. And I'm like, well, what do you say? And I'm like, okay, I got it, And so I get mobilized, and I'm down there in October.
What is USASOC?
That's the U.S. Army Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg. Yeah, and so I'm assigned to their intelligence directorate. I'm a warrant officer now. So they mobilized me for a year. So I spent a year at Fort Bragg. My kids were probably 6 and 8 or 5 and 7, roughly something like that or something, and got a chance to do some training for the SF guys that were going downrange on IEDs and some other kinds of stuff, and was actually helping get people prepared to go downrange. And of course, everyone wanted to go downrange, right? And so reservists that were called up were largely at that point in time backfilling active positions to release, the active guys downrange. And so that was a great experience. I got a lot of jumps in there, and it was just really a great experience. And I'm stateside and stuff, so I could kind of still, keep with the family and work. But I'm down there one day, and these two majors walk in, and they were from DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the time they had what was called the Defense Human Service. It was later renamed Defense Clandestine Service or something, but a DIA intelligence program that was looking at WMD exploitation. And they interviewed me. Sometimes they came like straight to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to talk to you about this." They said, "Do you have any experience with SCBAs?" Yes, because we'd been doing this meth lab stuff. "Do you have any experience working in contaminated environments? Do you have any forensic exploitation experience? These kinds of things." And they were hitting kind of a lot of the things. And they said, and so remember, we're pushing really everybody to Afghanistan. We weren't into
Right.
Iraq. We
Yeah, we
weren't
weren't even
into
there yet.
Iraq yet, right?
Yeah.
Until March of '03 or whatever. So these guys disappear, and I finish up at Fort Bragg. I go back. I'm a lieutenant there, and things are going groovy and everything, and then I get another call. So I ended up going to DC and spending up there for a brief amount of time with that element, and then off to Kuwait. We sat there for just a short period of time, and then into country. And so the organization was called the Chemical and Biological Intelligence Support Team, CBIST. So they were at the time, the premier site exploiters for national level targets of interest, and not just physical targets, but personalities that may have had an affiliation with the Iraqi regime in chemical or any of those kinds of threat materials and stuff. So really great organization. We had some civilians with us that were top-notch specialists, and a lot of equipment and things that nowadays are, especially with the advent of the sexy labs and TDAC and
Oh,
all
yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But from an IC perspective, this was an organization that was postured to do some pretty cool stuff. And so I'd been in the Army about 20 years by now, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so I'm like, all right, this is it. And it was it. And yeah, just it was a Wild West. Particularly, you talk to anybody that went to Iraq, especially guys that went back and forth. The early days were really
Crazy.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
really, really good time and stuff. So that was a short 6 months, and back home,
Where
and
were you stationed in Iraq? Where'd you go?
all over the place.
Okay.
So our main headquarters were near the airport,
Right.
and
Buy
we
up.
had and so we had some isolation to our compound. I did, just from a personal standpoint, obviously started to see in roadside bombs and things like, the Fedayeen went away, and the Republican Guard and all that kind of stuff went fairly quick. But the IED started. And it's the very beginning of that, right? Now we were seeing some of that in Afghanistan, certainly, but the Iraq thing, it was very clear that we were going to have an insurgency, and
Insurgency. Yeah.
certainly one with foreign influence and things like that from neighbors. So I sought out the sexy lab that was there, that was new, and Dick Larry, who later was my boss at the Pentagon, had that kind of thing going on. And then TDAC, I think, stood up in
It did.
'03, so
Yep.
it was still down the road a little bit too. So got to work some post blast scenes, and really started to see RC and RF type of devices and telemetry and stuff that, beyond just large bulk charges and stuff, gave me some spidey sense that, holy shit, this thing is really going to get crazy from an IED, sophistication standpoint. And of course, that played out and has played out worldwide since, with the
EFP.
proliferation. Yeah, and the homemade kind of ones that were junky but deadly, and then some that were very, very well made by state actors.
Yeah. Yeah. I ended up, I got to go over there in 2009 with Sexy, and that was probably one of the better experiences. My role was to do investigations, and usually they were on service members that got, killed in action. It was definitely a good experience. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, and kind of on that,
Definitely.
yeah, on that piece there, Jay. When we started to see some of these initial things and stuff, and they said, "Well, you have some post-blast experience, yes, you can tag along on some of these things." And we went to several of the medical facilities, specifically to retrieve pieces and parts that were embedded in the dead people, and that was they just didn't get that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
at first, they just didn't understand that at first. I mean, the bomb techs did and stuff, but I'm talking about leadership and just the whole community. And so that was kind of an interesting, thing to see there because as a CI guy, our charter is to investigate acts of terrorism, sabotage, espionage, sedition. I mean, similar to the Bureau's
Yeah.
FCI program.
Collect evidence.
Yep, sure. And then you had the CID or more the military police side of the force that was over there. Well, they didn't really have post blast experience or things like that and stuff. All that stuff really did mature into the levels of exploitation and things like that. But it was a great tour, for sure. Uh, Wrapped that up, came back. So we're talking 2003ish or so. Make captain, end up on a new bureau, a counterterrorism division or bureau that took in the firearms range and some other stuff. And I think, whatever. But I knew it was getting close for me to ready to go, get my 20 in and looking for a new chapter. I was probably topped out promotion wise, to be honest with you. And then certainly as a captain, I was becoming further removed from fun and cool stuff like scuba diving because I did a lot of that at the department, over
Yeah.
the years.
Did you just know? Did you just realize, hey, I'm coming towards the end? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think I just knew. I mean, I was still having fun, and the department was still good to me, and everything like that. But I think it really was just time. And I had a year or so prior to that, I developed a relationship with Chris Cherry through a program he had there to have no fee agreements with a handful of public safety techs that could come out to Sandia and assist with things that might be bomb disablement related and what have you. So, I kept in touch with him, and then as the time came close to me, we never really discussed it prior to that. But I said, "Hey, you looking at hiring anybody? I'm thinking about pulling the pin or something."
So just an opportunity came up.
Yeah, so lo and behold, he was wanting to hire a few people to kind of grow out his work portfolio there. And you've been out there many times; you kind of know how things are, segregated out and stuff like that. And I said, "Hey, we're going to New Mexico," and my kids were young at that still, so I'm thinking 10, 8, something like that. So the move for them, as far as school and family and stuff, was not
Not
significant
bad.
to pull them up and stuff. And so we moved over here and. Yeah, went to work out at the labs doing some really cool stuff and stuff that actually got way cooler later. But it was good. It was good work, and man, what an eye opener to realize because I felt like I had a pretty good handle on explosives and stuff like that. But man, that was a reality check being
So
around some of the expertise out there and
yeah, right.
the chemists and what I'm talking about. It can be a little bit humbling, but
Sure.
the beauty of it is they were really looking for some people who had ground experience to kind of
Yes.
bridge the gap between the responders, if you will, and the scientists or
Yeah.
engineers.
Was leaving difficult for you? Was giving up your, that operational side of the house? Were you still in the military still?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But was leaving law enforcement, did you struggle with that, or did you have, you know, did you look back and wish you'd waited, or were you like, no, this is good and I'm ready?
I think I was ready, Jay. I mean, I had done a lot of great things, and I felt like I was leaving at a time when the SWAT and the bomb guys were in a good position, and some wonderful people kind of come up through the ranks and things like that. So, no, I think it was just a good time. And I mean, I'm not saying I don't miss it or anything like that, but the beauty of it is that I had a very good idea that I was probably still going to be able to work with the bomb technicians, you know, once I was at Sandia, and of
Yeah.
course that was true.
Yeah.
That even though I was on the outside, you still got to see guys you knew and grew up with, and saw them kind of leave too on their own, and then others come in and things like that. So that was the upside of it. But they gave me a great send off, and like I said, don't regret any of that. But don't think I was going to do 30 years there because then other doors would have been closed.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So the timing really was just good.
So when an opportunity comes up, you should take it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look at it. It's kind of that plan B that I mentioned earlier and stuff like that. And, I'm glad I promoted when I did. The timing worked out good for those things too. So I would say that to anybody out there too. And I mean, you went through that is, decision to whether or not you want to try and promote or not. But you have the ability to impact your organization at a greater level. I mean, that's really the thing. And people, when you're on a team, you want good leaders and you want good leaders to promote. And in many organizations, you get to come back, and some you don't. And that can be the stickler for some people is, hey, I got what I like right here. And the chance of me coming back as soon, if
Yeah.
ever, is nil.
Right.
Some guys forego it for that, and I totally get that. But in my organization, I was able to see that the chances of being able to kind of land back in the division were pretty high, and so that was a big piece of it too. It wasn't so much the money or the stature, but well, my pension is better, certainly,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
as a captain. But
Yeah.
I think seizing opportunities, at least size them up and assess them because they may not come back.
Yeah. And so when you left the sheriff's office, you went to Sandia, you were
Mhm,
still in the army, correct?
mhm, mhm.
How did that work? Were they pretty good with you on drill and deployments and things like that?
Yeah, they were super. So I was there 2 years, I guess. Yeah, and I get another phone call from Fort Bragg, and
You get a lot of phone calls.
yeah, and you know what? That as a senior warrant, I was kind of a free agent in a way, and so by name requests and stuff are pretty cool. And this group of people needed some help in the intelligence area, and I deployed with a special operations task force to Iraq again, and had about 140 people in my section that I was the commander of, and doing phenomenal work with um, what I would say are probably our nation's finest people.
Yeah. How was that experience?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, got to grow a beard, pretty scraggly, but yeah, can't say a whole lot, really, honestly, Jay, about it, other than these were the people that were certainly tip of the spear, the
Doers.
tip of the tip. Yeah, and at a time when Al Zarqawi was very active, we could see that Al Qaeda in Iraq was morphing into what ultimately became ISIS. And we had a lot of foreign fighter rat lines coming in. Uh, did work with some bureau people on that effort, but suffice to say that it was probably my most rewarding of all experiences. Yeah, just there was I saw, and I've been in the army a long time at that point. I saw things as far as capabilities and skills that you just you'd heard of them, but you never knew much about it and stuff. And so it was just a really good experience.
Any stories you can share that really stick out in your mind?
I guess to stay on the bomb thing a little bit, I'm walking from point A to B, and we have one of those. It was the improvised rocket assisted mortars. Do you remember those? The
Yeah.
IRAMs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The IRAMs. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of these things, it's the size of like 2 scuba tanks on top of each other, come in improvised point detonating type fuse on it. It comes sailing into the goddamn compound and lands, I don't know, 25 feet away, kinda hits on the shoulder of the thing, just skids across the thing over there, so a little bit of a near miss, and you'd take indirect and, these kind of things, but this one was, like, right there, but and it was taken care of by the EOD conventional EOD guys that supported our area and stuff like that. As far as the actual work, what I would say is we were really pretty successful in targeting some pretty good HVTs. So I get out of there, what is that? That's Iraq '05.
Okay. Yep.
Back to Sandia, things are good, kids are in school. Yeah, life is good for a couple of years. '07 comes around and I get a call to go to the Pentagon, believe it or not.
Well, another phone call.
Yeah. I said, "Okay, what are we doing?" And they said, "Well, we need you to work in the as an action officer in the Pentagon, headquarters Army
What does that do?
G357, right, in the asymmetric warfare office, specifically in the counter IED division, which was commanded by Colonel Dick Larry and Colonel Leo Bradley. Guys you may have seen, they're very active and experienced leaders in Army EOD. And JIDO was a big thing,
Yeah.
right, going
Yep.
on right then. And so here's this old CW4 walking around the Pentagon. Nobody knew what to do with me, but I was able to work a handful of different programs, a lot of it through JIDO, that was funding material solutions downrange, right, new stuff and things like that, because they were throwing money at everything, of course, right then at that point. Man, I got to see how the Pentagon burns through 50, 100
Oh, yeah.
million, I mean, just left and right and stuff. So that was a really good experience. But kind of a key takeaway from that whole assignment there was, I lived in Crystal City. It was good. It was a good gig. They walk in one day and they said, "Hey, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, so number 2, DepSecDef, wants his own bomb squad here at the Pentagon. And we want you to help, kind of see what that's going to take and what have you." So networking, right? I'm like, oh boy. And of course, at this point, we're talking post 9/11.
Yep.
Everybody's competing for slots at the school.
Yeah.
The
Yep.
whole, I forgot what they called the assessment, criteria, justification criteria, and all that kind of stuff. But you got the number 2 in the Pentagon and all of the Defense Department. So the Pentagon Police Force is a very modern police organization. They have tactical and canine and all kinds of stuff. They have very robust chem bio response and all these kinds of things, but they didn't have a render safe capability.
Yeah.
So that would come from Andrews or Belvoir, Quantico, but they wanted to have their own in-house capability and everything. And what was that going to look like? Well, it's going to look like any other new bomb squad that wants seats at HDS and the equipment list and required equipment and things like that. And so I helped kind of massage that towards, fruition a little bit. And, I would talk to some of our mutual friends from the Bureau, and they're like, goddamn Frakes, like it was my idea,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like I came up with it. Now, did I think it was a good idea? Probably so, right? Because that building and
Right.
its surrounding area, and
Sure.
there's got the goddamn metro stop there and everything. So having immediate on-site capability from a render safe standpoint made perfect sense to me and everything. So I was a proponent of it and stuff. But it was just kind of a fun time and things like that. And then, ironically, later on through Sandia, I was able to go back down there with that unit once they were stood up and, got qualled and all that, and did some other level 3-ish kind of stuff with them and everything like that. It was just a good assignment. You asked if Sandia was supportive. Yes, I mean they were very supportive of my reserve duties and stuff like that. And so, never thought I'd have a chance to at least do a short stint at the Pentagon. Yeah, it was just kind of cool and stuff. But I was on a couple of conference calls that were kind of contentious, but all in good merit. I understand that, because you can have too many bomb squads in a region, right? And it dilutes down the calls for service numbers wise, and you know all that. But it was just kind of an interesting time, and I met some great people. And that office there is one of the big, proponents now for funding and stuff with Ravens and other things like that, stuff.
I think they still have a bomb squad, if I'm not mistaken. So
they do, and they've been able now to draw a lot of talent, from, and they've headhunted some people from the Bureau and other places and stuff. So they really are a good organization and stuff. And it was just kind of fun to be involved in the very front end, because it wasn't going to be a question of money. And it really wasn't going to be a question of whether it was going to happen, because I was waiting for some serious, measuring to go on, to see who kind of won that one. But I don't think it was a big ugly deal and stuff. It was just, one of those things. Yeah, but that was kind of fun. So I'm back to Sandia. That's 2010-ish or something like that. And then along came the stabilization program.
Yeah. So did Sandia end up being a something that was important to you? Did you really enjoy working there? Was it something that you could bring all your knowledge and training and skills to that job?
I could bring a good portion of them to the job, I think. And then I picked up a whole lot of stuff there. I mean, I really learned a lot there from a lot of people and things like that. And, as we looked at different kinds of challenges, the great thing about the National Lab complex, including the other labs, is you can draw on other people and expertise and stuff. And there's a lot of kind of friendly jesting that goes on between the labs and what have you. But Sandia is a big place. I don't know, about 15,000. You've been there many times. And just, man, every time you go to one area or another within the facilities, you learn about stuff that, you didn't know about. A lot of that is security reasons, but man, you just saw how much capability there was in-house there to tackle, some of the nation's hardest problems. And, yeah, so I really, really learned a lot there, and, promoted a couple of times there, and came out of the technologist ranks into the technical staff ranks, and promoted a couple of those rungs up there. And without finishing my college degree,
Really?
that's pretty unheard of there, quite frankly, because it's a pretty academic
Yeah.
environment, and I
Yeah.
totally understand it and everything. But the positions that I was in, where I was a program manager over people and had, many millions of dollars to look after for people that, that were looking to me to look after it, our partners at an NSA. I think it was just perhaps some of the experiences I had at the sheriff's office at a higher rank traded off for some of the formal education and stuff. But I was certainly topped out there from an advancement standpoint, and I was never a manager of people per se as far as like evaluations, but as a program manager, I had people that did report to me, quite honestly, day in, day out and stuff. But yeah, Sandia was an excellent experience for me, and I really enjoyed it. They treated me, very well, no question about it. And some of my very favorite people there are now going way up in the ranks over there. And so it goes back to what we're saying earlier about having good people to, see and things like that. And so, yeah, they were great. And then I guess to test them even more, I got another phone call and said, let's go to Afghanistan. So I'm like, all
So
right.
what was that about?
So this was 2010 now. Yeah, because the Pentagon was 7, 8. Yeah, this is 2010. And I said, what are we looking at? And they said, we want you to be a sexy OIC.
Really?
And I said, hell yeah, I'm in.
Yes.
So the orders get cut. I get over there and they're like, nope, we've got somebody else to take that position. And there were a couple of level 1 sexy labs in country. And then a couple of our allies had similar forensic capabilities in country at the time too. So I'm assigned, the orders were to Task Force Paladin, which was
Yeah.
the countrywide counter ID task force, right? To Paladin, similar to Task Force Troy in Iraq. So I'm going to Paladin, and the orders read sexy OIC, and I get there and they're like, no, we created a new position in the intelligence directorate, the J2. It's the J2E for exploitation. And so you will have oversight of the sexy labs and the detainee exploitation for
Interesting.
financiers and trainers, not emplacers. We were looking at different type of character set and that kind of stuff. So got to go all around the country, got to do a lot of neat stuff. The forensics capabilities at this point now, because we're talking 2010, were quite mature. TDAC was on all cylinders, a lot of interagency people in and out and things like that and stuff. So there really was a pretty robust forensic thing, but tying together the detainee interrogations to devices. And so now
Yeah.
you're talking,
Great work.
you're talking criminal conspiracies, essentially, and things, and working with the national security directorate from the host nation and stuff like that. And so that was a great experience. Like I said, I got to get all around the country and really kind of see what was happening in that regard. And it ended up being a better assignment for me altogether. And then, came back to the labs after that. We're talking 2011-ish. Man, I stayed in reserves, but as far as downrange overseas stuff, I made some trips to Japan, several, and then, did some other stuff here and there. But that was it for, overseas stuff. But now the stabilization program at Sandia is really going, and
Yeah,
I'm
it's robust.
I'm really on the ground with that a lot in the early days, getting new capabilities out there, and then progressed into kind of the program management stuff. And I left there as a program manager and had a really good turnover period with my successor, Mark. And so I left there. It's been 3 years now, but I left
Wow,
for the
has it
count.
really been?
It
Wow.
has, yeah. And so I left there at a time when some of the goals of the Bureau and that program were being met as far as numbers of cities, if you will, and specialized capabilities that were being rolled out and fielded. Those blocks were being checked. And so I felt like it was a really good time to go. And I was turning 60 and under Sandia's pension program that I was a member of. There's been some changes, but under that, 60, I needed to be 60 and to have at least 15 years on to draw a pension right away, and I had 18 years in, so I left there with just over 18 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
At age 60, and I was right when I was pulling the pin on the Army too, because you may know as an Army reservist, you draw your pay as a retiree at age 60. And it can be a little earlier if you've deployed. And they took some time off of that for me and stuff. But so those things were all kind of aligning at the same time, and had some home stuff going on too. And so it was just a really good time. But
Yeah. What are some life lessons that you recall after all that you've done with the military, overseas deployments, back and forth, back and forth? What would be one life lesson that you think you've learned from those deployments and working in the military and law enforcement?
yeah. Well, one is, and I guess maybe these go against each other. One is, stick with it, stick it out and things like that. So, staying around, like we're talking about reserve time, finish your time, what have you. And then the other one that may collide with that a little bit is know when it's time to leave.
Yeah,
And, you know,
yeah,
and I think I was able to hit those wickets and stuff because, Jay, even though they're our friends, we've all seen people who it's time for them to go, and that can be a tough one. And I was in a leadership position several times where I had to be the one to deliver that kind of news, and so that can be tough. You have other leadership challenges all along the way. And towards the end of both my Sandy and police career, more of it became budget related stuff like that than it did, decisions of, operational nature and stuff. But, knowing when it's time to leave and spend the amount of time that it takes to help groom your successor.
yes,
I think that's really important is because, you fall in love with your organization and you want it to do well,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. You've invested a lot of time in it. I
Hmm.
I wanted the FBI and the bomb school. I have a passion still for it. I love it.
Hmm.
I want it to
Hmm.
be successful. I want people in my community to win and be better all the times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've talked on every topic that I can think of through the questions that we brought up, but I usually ask, and this is for the younger generation, and I usually ask this question of my guest to end the interview, but what is one piece of life advice that has helped you win at life?
I think the networking piece and then coupling that with the personal touch of things like handwritten notes, Jay, you know, those things will come back in spades and pay dividends. And, you know, don't always expect something in return, And so I think that's it. I touched on it earlier, lifelong learner, and it doesn't have to be academic or anything like that. There's a lot of different ways to gain knowledge. And then, I think just a general piece of advice is, have your affairs in order. You're never too young to have a will, certainly, but if you have an estate or maybe some other kinds of things, but powers of attorney and wills and stuff like that, have that shit together, man. Because, I mentioned it when we were first talking today is that, everybody's retiring, right?
Yeah.
Pretty soon everybody's going to be dying.
Right.
And so,
Right.
have your shit together, make it easier on your family and stuff like that. Have a bucket list. I bucket listed a parachute jump, a month or so ago.
I saw that. I
Yeah,
saw
it
that. That was
was,
great.
bro, I'm going back next month. And then, yeah, and then I'm going to go with my son in May. He's a new Army officer and
That's great.
jump master, and he's doing great and stuff. So, I think we're going to go back and do that together. But yeah, make a bucket list. Check some things off of it. Doesn't have to be big things and stuff, but um, I'm looking at books that I want to read and have read and stuff like that. But then I'm like, I'm never going to get to those books, but I will get to this, the parachute jump and stuff. So
Right.
yeah, just keep having fun and stay in touch with people. I wasn't much for high school reunions and that kind of stuff, but if I see a sheriff's reunion or
Yeah.
If I get a call from some of the guys at NA84 to go have a beer, I did a couple weeks ago, show up for those things, because before long, we're all going to be going to funerals, brother.
Yeah, it goes away. What's one thing that you miss?
The people, certainly, and I think seeing the impact and, of some of the work you were doing and things like that. And so much of it is hard to talk about freely, Jay, and you know
Right,
that. And there's good
right.
reasons for that stuff, but getting to see the impact of your work, and
Yes.
and hearing from the guys that they haven't forgot you.
Yeah.
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 Like you calling to ask me to do this.
Well, you are a legend in our community and the military, and I appreciate you and your service, that your decades of service to this country and our community in Arizona and New Mexico and the regional Run Their Safe teams. And it's definitely felt for generations what you have done and accomplished. And I just wanted to say thank you, and also thank you for being on the show. It's an honor.
Yeah, great, Jay. Thanks for having me. And I mean, I really liked working with you guys. You were my home team, you know that, and they had good leaders and still do. And I appreciate you having me on, and the kind word.
All right. Keith Frakes, thank you, sir.